The Galactic Council chamber was enormous and filled with representatives from 40 different species. Jake Morrison stood at the entrance and felt small in a way he had never experienced before. Earth had finally achieved faster-than-light travel after decades of research and sacrifice. Humanity had reached out to the stars with hope and excitement. They had detected the Council's communication networks years ago and spent countless resources preparing for this moment. Jake had been chosen to represent his species because of his military background and diplomatic training. He wore his dress uniform and carried with him the hopes of 10 billion people back home. The chamber fell silent as he walked to the designated speaking platform. The High Arbiter was a tall creature with blue-scaled skin and forearms. His name was Theln, and he had governed the Council for longer than Jake had been alive. The Arbiter looked down at Jake with eyes that showed no warmth or welcome. Theln spoke in a voice that echoed through the massive hall. The words came through Jake's translator device as cold, formal statements. Humanity had been evaluated and their technology assessed. The Council had reviewed Earth's history and cultural development. They had examined humanity's wars and conflicts and diplomatic failures. The conclusion was clear and brutal. Humanity was too primitive and too aggressive to join the Council as equals. They would be given a probationary status at the edge of known space. The Council would provide them with a decommissioned mining station and access to a scrapyard. These were the only resources humanity would receive. They could use these materials however they wished. If humanity proved themselves worthy over the next century, then perhaps they might be reconsidered for proper membership. Jake felt his jaw tighten, but he kept his expression neutral. He had been trained for difficult negotiations, but this was not a negotiation at all. This was a dismissal. He asked to see the station and scrapyard before accepting the Council's terms. Theln waved one of his hands in a gesture that seemed to indicate boredom. A holographic display appeared showing a rusted cylindrical structure floating in empty space. The station looked ancient and barely functional. The scrapyard was a debris field of broken ships and scattered components. There were hundreds of vessels in various states of decay. Most were missing large sections of hull or had gaping holes in their structures. Jake recognized some of the designs from Council military databases. These were warships from conflicts that had ended generations ago. They had been stripped of anything valuable and left to rot in the darkness. The Kreven representative, a being named Krelmon with thick armor plating and multiple eyes, made a sound that Jake's translator interpreted as laughter. Krelmon spoke in a mocking tone about how humanity should be grateful for such generosity. After all, the scrapyard alone contained more advanced technology than Earth had ever produced. Perhaps in a few hundred years, humans might learn enough to make use of it. Other representatives joined in with their own comments. Some were merely dismissive, while others were openly hostile. A few smaller species remained silent, but Jake could see something in their expressions that might have been sympathy or understanding. They had likely faced similar treatment when they first encountered the Council. Jake made his formal acceptance of the terms because there was no other choice. Humanity needed access to the galaxy even if it meant accepting this insult. He left the Council chamber with his small delegation, and they boarded their ship in silence. The journey to the mining station took 3 days. During that time, Jake studied every piece of information they had about the scrapyard and the derelict ships. His second-in-command was Lisa Hayes, and she had served with him for 15 years. She was brilliant and tough and absolutely furious about the Council's decision. They sat in the ship's conference room and reviewed holographic projections of the debris field. Lisa pointed out that most of the ships were from different species and different eras of warfare. Each one represented a different approach to military technology and design philosophy. Pete Harris was their chief engineer, and he had barely slept since seeing the scrapyard data. He kept running calculations and making notes on his datapad. Pete was the kind of person who saw problems as interesting puzzles rather than obstacles. He had already identified several systems that might still be functional with proper repair. The weapons specialist was Amy Chen, and she had a reputation for creative thinking. Amy had served in Earth's defense forces during the Mars colony conflicts. She knew how to make limited resources count. As she examined the weapon systems on the derelict ships, her eyes lit up with possibilities. The translator tech they had was basic, but it worked. The navigation systems were outdated but functional. The fusion reactors were damaged but repairable. Every single component in that scrapyard represented knowledge that humanity did not possess. When they finally arrived at the mining station, Jake gathered his entire crew of 300 personnel. They stood in the main hangar bay, which was large enough to hold their ship and still have room for construction projects. The station's life support systems were barely adequate, and many sections were sealed off due to damage. But it was theirs. Jake looked at the faces of his crew and saw determination mixed with uncertainty. These were soldiers and engineers and scientists who had left Earth knowing they might never return. They had volunteered for this mission because they believed in humanity's future among the stars. Jake told them the truth without sugarcoating anything. The council had given them garbage and expected them to fail. They had been dismissed as primitives who would eventually give up and fade into obscurity. Every major power in the galaxy thought humanity was not worth their attention or respect. Then Jake told them what they were going to do about it. They were going to take this scrap and build something that would make the council regret their arrogance. They were going to study every broken ship and learn from technologies that spanned dozens of species and centuries of warfare. They would combine systems that had never been designed to work together. They would use human ingenuity and Earth's history of making the impossible possible. The crew would work in secret and tell the council nothing. Let them think humanity was struggling with basic repairs and simple salvage operations. Let them forget about the humans at the edge of space. When they were ready, when they had built something truly remarkable, then the galaxy would see what humans could accomplish. Lisa stepped forward and asked the question everyone was thinking. What exactly were they going to build? Jake smiled for the first time since leaving the council chamber. They were going to build a warship unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. They would take the best components from every derelict vessel and combine them with human engineering. It would not be pretty, and it would not follow traditional design principles, but it would be functional and it would be deadly. The council had made a critical mistake. They had given humanity access to military technology from multiple species without realizing the potential. Each species had developed their systems to counter specific threats and enemies, but no one had ever combined all these different approaches into a single vessel. Pete started organizing salvage teams immediately. They would need to catalog every single component in the debris field. Amy began studying weapon systems and their potential integration. Lisa took charge of hull analysis and structural engineering. Jake established a communication schedule with Earth and requested additional personnel and resources. The work began that same day. Teams in environmental suits floated through the scrapyard examining derelict ships and tagging useful components. Every power conduit and armor plate and weapons array was documented and analyzed. The station's repair bays came back online one by one as engineers worked around the clock. Within weeks, the station felt alive again with the sounds of construction and the glow of welding torches. Humanity had been given scrap and told to be grateful. Instead, they saw opportunity and possibility. The council thought they were being generous by giving humans access to worthless debris. They had no idea they had just armed their future rivals with the tools needed to challenge the established order. Jake stood in the observation deck watching his crew's work with focused intensity. The galaxy had underestimated humanity, and that was going to be their biggest mistake. 8 months passed, and the mining station had transformed into a hub of constant activity. Jake watched his crews work through day and night cycles without complaint. They had established a rotation system that kept construction going at all times. The main hangar bay now held the skeletal framework of something that was slowly taking shape. It looked strange and asymmetrical compared to the sleek council warships in their database. But Pete assured everyone that function mattered more than appearance. The chief engineer had become obsessed with understanding how different alien technologies could work together. He spent hours in the station's makeshift laboratory running tests on salvaged components. His breakthrough came when he discovered that Crevan power systems could be amplified using Zelthian energy matrices. The two species were enemies and had designed their technologies to counter each other, but they had never considered someone might combine them into a hybrid system. Pete called Jake down to the lab to demonstrate his discovery. A Crevan plasma conduit was connected to a Zelthian crystal matrix through adapters that Pete had fabricated himself. When he activated the system, the energy output was 3 times higher than either component could produce alone. The efficiency was remarkable and the stability was perfect. Pete explained that each species had focused on maximizing their own technological advantages while minimizing their weaknesses. But when you removed the competitive aspect and simply looked at pure engineering, the systems complemented each other in unexpected ways. Jake immediately understood the implications. If they could do this with power systems, they could do it with everything else. The entire ship could be built on this principle of combining technologies that were never meant to work together. Lisa had been working on hull design and armor composition. The derelict ships yielded hundreds of different armor plates made from various alloys and materials. Each species had developed armor to defend against specific weapons types. The Thraxians used dense metallic compounds that could absorb kinetic impacts. The Zelthians preferred energy-resistant ceramics. The Crevans relied on reactive plating that could disperse plasma bursts. Lisa proposed layering these different materials in a honeycomb pattern, with Earth's own titanium carbon weave as a binding structure. She built a test panel and subjected it to every weapon type they could simulate. The results were stunning. The layered armor was more effective than any single material. It could handle kinetic rounds and energy weapons and plasma bursts equally well. The defensive capabilities exceeded current Council military standards by a significant margin. Amy had made equally impressive progress with weapons systems. She had salvaged railguns from Crevan destroyers and energy cannons from Zelthian cruisers. She also found some interesting missile systems from a species called the Vorath, who were no longer active in Council affairs. Amy's insight was that each weapon system had targeting and firing solutions designed for specific combat scenarios. But human artificial intelligence was more flexible than any alien computer system they had encountered. Amy integrated all these weapons into a single network, controlled by an AI that could analyze enemy ships in real time. The system could switch between weapon types instantly based on what would be most effective. It could fire railguns at targets with strong energy shields and switch to plasma cannons against ships with heavy kinetic armor. The AI could also predict enemy movements based on analysis of their ship designs and typical tactical doctrines. The construction crews worked with materials from over 200 derelict ships. They cannibalized everything useful and recycled what they could not use directly. The ship that was taking shape in the hangar bay looked like a patchwork creation. The hull showed sections of different colored alloys welded together. The design was asymmetrical because they had built around the best components rather than following a predetermined plan. Some Council engineers would have called it ugly. Jake called it practical. Every system had been tested and retested. Every component had been integrated with careful attention to compatibility and efficiency. Pete had personally verified every power conduit and every structural joint. Lisa had inspected every armor plate and every internal bulkhead. Amy had calibrated every weapons array and run thousands of firing simulations. Earth sent additional personnel and resources as word of the project spread through human space. Engineers volunteered for one-way trips just to be part of this effort. The station's population grew to over 800 people. They established manufacturing facilities to build custom components when salvaged parts were not suitable. A small fusion reactor from a Zelthian scout ship was modified to serve as the main power plant. Its output was increased by 40% using Pete's hybrid energy systems. The reactor fed power to engines that combined human fusion drive technology with alien gravity manipulation. The result was a propulsion system that could accelerate faster than ships twice its size. Jake had insisted on redundancy for all critical systems. They could not afford a single point of failure. Every major system had backup components and alternate routing. The life support could function even if 3/4 of it was destroyed. The power systems had multiple independent networks. The weapons could operate on emergency power if the main reactor failed. Lisa suggested they test individual systems before final integration. They took the partially completed ship out of the hangar for its first flight. The engines performed beyond expectations. The maneuvering thrusters gave them precise control despite the ship's odd shape. The power systems ran smoothly without any fluctuations. Pete monitored every reading and made minor adjustments as they went. After 6 hours of testing, they brought the ship back to the station. The crew celebrated this first milestone with a meal together in the main cafeteria. Jake stood up and thanked everyone for their dedication and skill. He reminded them that they were not just building a ship. They were proving that humanity deserved respect. They were showing the galaxy that dismissing Earth had been a mistake. The weapons testing came next, and Amy was nervous despite her confidence in the systems. They had set up target drones in an empty sector of space. The drones were programmed to move and deploy shields like actual warships. Amy sat at the weapons console and targeted the first drone. She fired a railgun round and watched it streak through space. The projectile punched through the drone's shields and tore it apart. The kinetic energy was devastating. She switched to energy cannons and destroyed 2 more drones with precise shots. The plasma systems melted through armor like it was paper. The AI targeting system tracked multiple drones simultaneously and prioritized threats automatically. In 15 minutes, Amy had destroyed 20 drones without a single miss. Jake watched from the command chair and felt a surge of pride. They had built something remarkable. The final touches took another month. They installed sensor arrays salvaged from reconnaissance vessels. They added communication systems that could interface with council networks. They painted the hull in a dark gray that made it harder to detect against the background of space. Lisa suggested they name the ship, and Jake had been thinking about this for weeks. The name needed to represent their situation and their determination. They had been cast aside and dismissed. They had been told to accept their inferior position. But humanity had never been good at accepting defeat. Jake announced that the ship would be called the Defiant. The name was perfect, and the crew agreed immediately. They held a small ceremony where Lisa officially designated the vessel as Earth's first hybrid warship. Pete ran final diagnostics on every system, while Amy conducted last weapons checks. The Defiant was ready for active service. Jake filed reports with Earth describing their progress in vague terms. He did not mention the true capabilities of what they had built. The Council had observers who monitored human communications, and Jake wanted them to remain ignorant. Let them think humanity was struggling with basic salvage operations. Let them believe Earth was still decades away from building anything significant. The truth would reveal itself soon enough. Jake gathered his senior staff in the ready room adjacent to the bridge. He told them that they needed to be prepared for conflict. The Council would not react well when they discovered what humanity had accomplished. Some species would see it as a threat. Others would see it as an opportunity, but no one would be able to ignore them anymore. Lisa asked what would happen if the Council demanded they surrender the Defiant for inspection. Jake said that would not happen because they were not going to advertise what they had built. The ship would remain secret until circumstances forced its revelation. They would continue salvage operations publicly, while training their crew privately. They would build up supplies and prepare for whatever came next. Amy pointed out that they had enough salvage remaining to potentially build more ships. Pete confirmed this and said they could construct at least 3 more vessels using the same hybrid approach. Each one would be unique because they would use different combinations of salvage technology, but all of them would be formidable. Jake made the decision to begin planning for additional ships immediately. One vessel could be destroyed or disabled. The Creven Consortium had been watching humanity's sector with casual interest. They had noted the salvage operations and the repair of the mining station. These activities seemed appropriate for a primitive species trying to establish themselves. The consortium had not bothered to investigate further because humans simply were not important enough to warrant attention. This dismissive attitude would prove to be a critical mistake. Commander Vexthor was a decorated Creven officer with 40 years of military service. He commanded a task force of 5 destroyers that patrolled the outer regions of consortium space. His current assignment was routine border enforcement and occasional intimidation of lesser species. When his sensors detected the mineral-rich asteroid belt near human territory, Vexthor saw an opportunity for easy profit and a demonstration of power. The asteroid belt technically fell within the boundaries that had been assigned to humanity. But those boundaries were more suggestions than actual law and consortium thinking. Lesser species did not have the power to enforce territorial claims against major council members. Vexthor ordered his fleet to enter the belt and begin mining operations. His crews deployed extraction equipment and started harvesting valuable minerals. When human communication channels broadcast warnings about territorial violations, Vexthor found it amusing. His communications officer was a younger Crevan named Draal, who had never encountered humans before. Draal asked if they should respond to the warnings. Vexthor laughed and told him to ignore the primitives. They had no military capability worth considering. Their protests were meaningless noise. Jake received the reports about Creven ships in their asteroid belt within hours. He was in his quarters reviewing crew schedules when Lisa knocked on his door. She came in looking angry and handed him a datapad showing sensor readings. 5 Crevan destroyers were actively mining resources that belonged to humanity. They had ignored all warnings and showed no signs of leaving. Jake felt his own anger rising, but he kept his voice calm. He asked Lisa to assemble the senior staff immediately. They met in the ready room 15 minutes later. Pete brought up tactical displays showing the Crevan fleet's positions. Amy analyzed their ship configurations and identified them as standard consortium destroyers. Each one carried significant firepower and heavy armor. Against any conventional human vessel, they would be completely dominant. But the Defiant was not conventional. Jake made his decision quickly because hesitation would be interpreted as weakness. They would launch immediately and confront the Crevan fleet. This was the moment they had been preparing for, even though it came sooner than expected. Lisa pointed out that this would reveal their capabilities to the Council. Jake agreed, but said the alternative was accepting territorial violations and encouraging further aggression. If they backed down now, every species in the galaxy would know humans could be pushed around with impunity. The Defiant's crew moved to battle stations with practiced efficiency. They had trained for this scenario dozens of times. The ship undocked from the station and accelerated toward the asteroid belt. Pete monitored the engines and power systems. Everything was running perfectly. Amy armed all weapons arrays and activated the targeting AI. The system began analyzing the Crevan ships based on database information and real-time sensor. Data Vexthor's tactical officer detected the approaching human vessel and brought it to his commander's attention. Vexthor looked at the sensor readings with initial confusion. The ship appeared to be constructed from salvaged components. Its hull showed clear signs of being a patchwork creation. The power signature was unusual but not particularly impressive. Vexthor assumed the humans were sending their only warship to make a symbolic protest. He decided to teach them a lesson about challenging consortium authority. He ordered his lead destroyer to fire a warning shot across the human ship's bow. This was standard procedure when dealing with lesser species. The plasma burst would demonstrate consortium firepower without actually destroying the target. It usually resulted in immediate retreat and compliance. The Defiant's sensors detected the incoming plasma burst and automatically calculated its trajectory. Jake watched the tactical display and saw the shot would pass safely ahead of them. He did not order evasive maneuvers. Instead, he told their pilot to maintain course and increase speed. The warning shot flashed past them and dissipated harmlessly. Vexthor was surprised when the human ship did not slow down or change direction. Instead, it accelerated directly toward his fleet. The closing speed was remarkable and made his tactical officer recalculate twice to confirm the readings. No ship that size should be able to accelerate that quickly without tearing itself apart. The structural stress should have been impossible to manage. Vexthor felt the first stirring of concern. Perhaps these humans were more capable than initial reports suggested. Jake ordered Amy to prepare to fire as soon as they were in optimal range. The weapons specialist confirmed that all systems were ready. The AI had calculated firing solutions for all 5 Crevan ships and prioritized targets based on threat assessment. The lead destroyer was designated as primary target. Jake wanted to make an immediate statement about the Defiant's capabilities. He gave the order to fire and Amy executed without hesitation. The hybrid railguns fired in rapid sequence. The projectiles were accelerated to a significant fraction of light speed, using combined human and Crevan technology. They were also wrapped in Zelthian energy fields that enhanced their penetration capabilities. The effect was devastating. The lead Crevan destroyer's shields flickered and failed under the assault. The railgun rounds punched through the hull in 3 separate locations. Atmosphere vented into space as emergency systems struggled to contain the damage. Vexthor stared at his tactical display in shock. His most powerful ship had been crippled in seconds by a vessel he had dismissed as primitive. He shouted orders for all ships to return fire and destroy the human vessel, but the Defiant was already moving. The ship used a combination of conventional thrusters and gravity manipulation to change direction with impossible speed. It repositioned faster than Crevan targeting systems could track. 2 more destroyers took hits before they could even acquire firing solutions. Their shields held better than the first ship, but the damage was significant. Vexthor realized with growing horror that he was not fighting a primitive species. He was facing technology that surpassed current consortium standards. The human ship moved like a fighter but hit like a battleship. Its weapons bypassed shields that should have been effective. Its armor absorbed return fire without significant damage. The battle was supposed to be a simple demonstration of power. Instead, it had become a fight for survival. Vexthor ordered his fleet into a defensive formation that Consortium doctrine considered unbreakable. The ships formed a sphere that allowed overlapping fields of fire. Any attacker would face concentrated firepower from multiple angles. This formation had won countless battles against numerically superior forces. Jake watched the Crevan ships reposition and smiled slightly. Their tactical doctrine was predictable because it relied on conventional assumptions about ship capabilities. The Defiant did not follow conventional rules. He ordered a microjump that used their hybrid warp system. The technology combined human faster-than-light concepts with salvaged alien components. The result was the ability to make short-range jumps with minimal charge time. The Defiant disappeared from Crevan sensors and reappeared behind their formation. Amy immediately fired on the rear ships, which had their weakest shields facing the wrong direction. The AI targeting system had predicted this exact scenario and already had firing solutions prepared. 2 more Crevan destroyers took critical damage. Their engines went offline and they began drifting. The remaining 2 ships attempted to turn and engage, but the Defiant was faster and more maneuverable. The battle had lasted only 14 minutes and the outcome was clear. 3 Consortium destroyers were crippled and powerless. 2 were retreating at maximum speed toward friendly space. Vexthor sat in his damaged command chair and watched his fleet fall apart. His ship had lost main power and was running on emergency systems. The human vessel approached slowly and he expected it to finish them off. Instead, his communication system activated with an incoming message. Jake's face appeared on Vexthor's main screen. The human looked calm and professional. There was no gloating or anger in his expression. He simply stated facts. Jake told Vexthor that the Crevan fleet had violated established territorial boundaries. They had ignored diplomatic warnings and proceeded with illegal mining operations. This was unacceptable behavior and would not be tolerated. The Consortium had 24 hours to remove all vessels and equipment from human space. Any future violations would result in immediate military action. The crippled ships would be allowed to make repairs and leave. But if they remained beyond the deadline, they would be destroyed. Jake ended the transmission without waiting for a response. The Defiant moved away and took up a patrol position near the asteroid belt. Vexthor contacted the 2 ships that had retreated and ordered them to return for rescue operations. His entire task force had been humiliated by a single enemy vessel. The Galactic Council convened an emergency session for the first time in 30 years. Representatives from all major species gathered in the Great Chamber, with tension hanging thick in the air. High Arbiter Theln called the meeting to order and immediately addressed the situation with humanity. Video footage of the battle between the Defiant and the Crevan task force played on the central holographic display. Every representative watched as a single human vessel systematically destroyed or disabled 5 Consortium destroyers. The tactical superiority was undeniable. The technological advantage was clear. Theln paused the footage and asked for comments. The chamber erupted in shouting and accusations. Kralmon, the Crevan representative who had mocked humanity months earlier, was livid with rage and embarrassment. He slammed his appendages on the table and demanded immediate action. The humans had clearly stolen Council military secrets. There was no other explanation for their technological capabilities. They must have infiltrated research facilities or bribed corrupt officials. The Consortium demanded a full investigation and the immediate seizure of all human vessels for inspection. Kralmon's anger was understandable, because the defeat had severely damaged Consortium prestige. Other species were questioning Crevan military dominance. Trade agreements were being renegotiated. The political fallout was spreading rapidly through their sphere of influence. The Zelthian representative was a diplomat named Vorin, who had served on the council for decades. Vorin spoke more carefully than Kralmon, but his concerns were equally serious. He pointed out that human technology appeared to combine systems from multiple species. This hybrid approach was unprecedented and potentially destabilizing. The balance of power in the galaxy had been maintained for centuries through careful control of military technology. Each species developed their own systems and the council monitored proliferation. But the humans had bypassed this entire structure by salvaging and combining discarded components. Vorin argued that this set a dangerous precedent. If other lesser species followed humanity's example, the council's authority would collapse. Earth's representative was Senator Lyra Worth. a former admiral who had been appointed specifically for this crisis. She was a tall woman in her 50s with gray hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. Lyra waited for the shouting to die down before speaking. Her voice was calm but carried authority earned through decades of military and diplomatic service. She began by addressing the accusation of theft. Humanity had stolen nothing. Every component of the Defiant came from materials the Council itself had declared worthless. The scrapyard had been given to humanity as a dismissive gesture. No one had placed any restrictions on what humans could do with those materials. The Council's own regulations had failed to account for creative engineering. That failure was not humanity's responsibility. Lyra continued by pointing out the hypocrisy of the Council's complaints. When humanity first contacted the galaxy, they had been evaluated and dismissed as primitives. They were given garbage and told to survive on the edge of known space. No one offered technology transfers or cultural exchanges. No one provided guidance or mentorship. The Council's major powers had made it clear that humans were on their own. So humanity adapted. They used the resources available and applied their own ingenuity. If the result threatened the established order, then perhaps that order was not as stable as everyone believed. Lyra's words landed like hammer blows. Several smaller species representatives nodded in agreement. They had experienced similar treatment over the years. Theln raised his hands for silence and tried to restore order. He acknowledged that humanity had technically not violated any specific regulations. However, the spirit of the Council's probationary assignment had been clear. Humans were supposed to demonstrate peaceful development and gradual integration. Instead, they had built a warship and engaged in military action against a Council member. This suggested aggressive intentions and a disregard for diplomatic solutions. Theln's argument was carefully constructed to shift blame onto humanity without directly defending the consortium's territorial violation. It was classic political maneuvering, designed to maintain Council unity against an outside threat. Lyra responded by showing footage of the Crevan fleet, entering human territory and ignoring all diplomatic warnings. She presented communication logs demonstrating that humanity had exhausted peaceful options before taking military action. The consortium had assumed humans were too weak to defend their territorial rights. That assumption had been wrong. Lyra asked a simple question that made the entire chamber uncomfortable. If the Council expected humanity to respect established boundaries, why did that same expectation not apply to Council members? The silence that followed was deafening. Everyone knew the answer, but no one wanted to say it out loud. The Council's rules applied differently to major powers than to lesser species. That inequality was the foundation of the current order. Smaller species representatives began speaking up more boldly. A delegate from the Taurian Collective pointed out that their own territory had been violated by consortium mining operations just last year. They had filed formal complaints that were ignored. A representative from the Vin Assembly shared similar experiences with Zelthian military exercises in their space. These species had been powerless to resist because they lacked military capabilities. Now they saw humanity successfully defending their rights, and it gave them hope. Theln realized the situation was spiraling out of his control. The emergency session was supposed to unite the Council against humanity. Instead, it was exposing long, simmering resentments and inequalities. The debate continued for hours with no resolution. The major powers wanted humanity punished or at least restricted. The smaller species wanted more information about human technology and capabilities. Some even expressed interest in establishing diplomatic relations with Earth. Theln finally called for a recess to allow cooler heads to prevail. The Council would reconvene in 1 week after representatives consulted with their governments. Lyra left the chamber knowing she had bought humanity some time, but also knowing the fight was far from over. The Council would not simply accept this challenge to their authority. They would respond somehow, and humanity needed to be ready. Back on the station, Jake received regular updates about the Council proceedings. He was not surprised by their reaction. Powerful institutions never gave up control willingly. He called a meeting with his senior staff to discuss their next moves. Pete had been working on plans for additional ships using the remaining salvage. He estimated they could build 4 more vessels similar to the Defiant within 6 months. Each one would have unique capabilities based on available components. Amy suggested they accelerate the timeline given the political situation. If the Council decided to take military action, 1 ship would not be enough. Lisa agreed and proposed organizing the construction into 2 shifts to maximize efficiency. Jake approved the expanded construction program and sent a request to Earth for additional personnel and resources. The response came within days. Earth's government fully supported the military buildup and was sending 10 engineering teams along with enough raw materials to triple their construction capacity. Public opinion on Earth was overwhelmingly positive. Humanity had been dismissed and insulted by the galactic community. Now they were proving they deserved respect. The mood was nationalistic and defiant in the best possible way. Young people were volunteering for space service in record numbers. The Defiant had become a symbol of human determination and ingenuity. The station expanded its facilities rapidly. New habitat modules were attached to accommodate the growing population. Manufacturing bays were built to produce components that could not be salvaged. The scrapyard continued to yield useful materials as crews worked systematically through the debris field. Pete established specialized teams for different technologies. One group focused on power systems while another worked on weapons integration. A third team handled structural engineering and hull construction. The efficiency improved dramatically as everyone learned from building the Defiant. What had taken 8 months for the first ship would take only 4 months for subsequent vessels. The Council's recess ended and they reconvened as scheduled. The major powers had reached a consensus during the break. They would not directly attack humanity, because that would confirm they saw humans as a legitimate threat. Instead, they would impose economic sanctions and technological restrictions. Human ships would be barred from Council-controlled space stations. Trade would be limited to essential goods only. No species would be permitted to share advanced technology with humanity. The hope was that isolation would limit human expansion and eventually force them back into compliance. Thelen announced these measures with formal ceremony and expected them to solve the problem. He was wrong. The sanctions had unexpected effects. Smaller species saw them as confirmation that the Council feared humanity. Several governments reached out to Earth through back channels expressing interest in quiet partnerships. They could not openly defy the Council, but they could share information and coordinate on mutual interests. 6 months after the battle with the Crevan fleet, humanity's military strength had grown significantly. The station now housed 6 warships, each one a masterpiece of hybrid engineering. The Defiant had been joined by 5 sister ships that Jake named the Relentless, the Resolute, the Valiant, the Guardian, and the Sentinel. Each vessel had unique capabilities based on the salvaged components used in construction. The Relentless was built for speed and reconnaissance. The Resolute carried heavy armor and close-range weapons. The Valiant specialized in long-range bombardment. The Guardian had advanced electronic warfare systems. The Sentinel served as a mobile command platform with enhanced communications. Together, they represented the most technologically advanced small fleet in the galaxy. The crews trained constantly to operate as a coordinated unit. They practiced formations and communication protocols. They ran combat simulations against every known Council ship design. Jake pushed them hard because he knew conflict was inevitable. The Council's sanctions had failed to contain humanity. The diplomatic isolation had backfired by driving smaller species toward Earth. The major powers were losing prestige and control. They would have to respond with force eventually. That response came sooner than expected. The Zelthian Empire, the oldest and most powerful member of the Council, decided to act. They could not tolerate the continuing erosion of their authority. Fleet Admiral Torin was chosen to lead the operation. He was a legendary military commander with victories spanning 4 decades. Torin assembled a battle fleet of 15 warships, including 3 heavy cruisers. This was a force capable of conquering entire star systems. The Zelthian High Command believed this overwhelming display of power would force humanity to submit. They expected Jake to back down when faced with impossible odds. They were wrong. The Zelthian fleet entered human space, broadcasting a formal ultimatum. All hybrid vessels were to be surrendered immediately for inspection and disarmament. Failure to comply would result in the complete destruction of human military assets. Torin gave humanity 12 hours to respond. He fully expected surrender and was already planning the occupation of the mining station. Jake received the ultimatum while reviewing fleet exercises with his senior staff. He read it carefully and then looked at his officers. Lisa was ready for battle and her expression showed no fear. Pete was confident in their ships and their systems. Amy had been preparing for exactly this scenario. They all knew what Jake's decision would be before he announced it. Humanity had come too far to back down now. They had proven themselves capable of defending their territory. If the Council wanted war, then war was what they would get. Jake composed a response that was broadcast not just to the Zelthian fleet, but to every Council world and every species with receivers in range. His message was simple and direct. Jake stated that humanity rejected the ultimatum entirely. The hybrid vessels were built from materials legally obtained and would not be surrendered under any circumstances. Human territory would be defended against all threats regardless of the attacker's identity. The Council had dismissed Earth as primitive and weak. They had given humanity scrap and expected failure. Instead, humans had thrived and built something remarkable. The age of dismissing newcomers was over. The galaxy would have to accept that humanity was here to stay. Jake ended the transmission by thanking Admiral Torin for the opportunity to demonstrate human resolve. It was a calculated insult designed to anger the Zelthian commander. Angry opponents made mistakes. The human fleet launched from the station in full battle formation. 6 ships against 15 seemed like suicide to conventional military thinking, but Jake had advantages that Torin could not fully appreciate. The human vessels were faster and more maneuverable than anything in the Zelthian fleet. Their hybrid weapons systems could adapt to different defensive technologies. Their armor layering made them incredibly resilient. Most importantly, their crews were highly trained and absolutely committed. Every person on those ships understood what was at stake. This was not just a battle. This was humanity's declaration that they would never be dismissed or ignored again. Torin watched the human fleet approach and felt confident in his numerical superiority. His tactical officer reported that the enemy vessels appeared to be the same patchwork construction as the ship that had defeated the Crevan task force. Torin ordered his fleet into a standard engagement formation that maximized overlapping fire zones. He planned to destroy the human ships quickly and decisively. The Zelthian Empire would demonstrate to the entire galaxy what happened to species who challenged established authority. His heavy cruisers moved to the front while destroyers formed a protective screen. It was textbook strategy executed by highly experienced crews. Jake studied the Zelthian formation and smiled slightly. Their tactics were predictable because they relied on conventional assumptions. The human fleet split into 3 groups of 2 ships each. The Defiant and Relentless formed the center group. The Resolute and Guardian took the left flank. The Valiant and Sentinel positioned on the right. This unconventional deployment confused Torin momentarily. He had expected the humans to concentrate their forces for maximum firepower. Instead, they were spreading out and presenting multiple targets. Torin decided this was a desperate attempt to divide his attention. He ordered his destroyers to engage the flanking groups while his cruisers focused on the center. The battle began with a massive exchange of fire. Zelthian plasma cannons lit up space with brilliant colors. Human railguns and hybrid energy weapons responded with devastating accuracy. The initial clash was chaotic and brutal. The Resolute took several hits, but its layered armor held. The Guardian deployed electronic countermeasures that confused Zelthian targeting systems. On the right flank, the Valiant used its long-range weapons to hammer enemy destroyers from distance. The Sentinel coordinated fleet communications and provided tactical data to all ships simultaneously. Jake watched the battle unfold from the Defiance bridge. Everything was going according to plan. The human fleet's true advantage became apparent as the battle progressed. Their ships could change direction and speed faster than Zelthian vessels could compensate. Amy's AI targeting systems predicted enemy movements and adjusted firing solutions in real time. When Zelthian ships deployed their strongest shields, human weapons switched to kinetic rounds. When they reinforced armor, energy weapons targeted weak points. The adaptability was unlike anything Torin had encountered in his long career. His ships were fighting blind against an enemy that seemed to anticipate every move. 3 destroyers were disabled in the first 20 minutes. A heavy cruiser took critical damage and began retreating. Jake ordered the Defiant and Relentless to execute a coordinated micro-jump. The 2 ships disappeared from Zelthian sensors and reappeared behind enemy lines. They fired immediately on the rearguard destroyers that had their strongest shields facing the wrong direction. 2 more enemy ships were crippled before the Zelthian formation could react. Torin realized with growing alarm that he was losing control of the battle. His numerical advantage meant nothing when his ships could not land effective hits. The human vessels moved like fighters but absorbed damage like capital ships. Their weapons penetrated defenses that should have been impenetrable. This was not the easy victory he had anticipated. Lisa coordinated the left flank group in a daring maneuver. The Resolute drew fire from 4 Zelthian ships while the Guardian used electronic warfare to blind their sensors. When the enemy focused entirely on the Resolute, the Guardian struck from an unexpected angle. Its weapons were specially configured for armor penetration. One Zelthian destroyer exploded in a brilliant flash. Another lost engine power and began drifting. Pete monitored damage reports from all human ships. They had taken hits, but nothing critical. The redundant systems he had designed were keeping everything operational. Power levels remained high. Weapons were functioning at full capacity. The fleet was performing exactly as intended. Admiral Torren faced a choice he had never expected to confront. He could continue fighting and risk losing his entire fleet, or he could retreat and accept humiliation. His pride demanded he fight on. His tactical sense told him retreat was the only rational option. The human ships showed no signs of weakness. His own fleet was being systematically dismantled. Half his destroyers were disabled or destroyed. One heavy cruiser was gone and another was barely functional. The remaining ships were taking damage faster than they could repair. Torren made the decision that would haunt him for the rest of his career. He ordered a full retreat. The Zelthian fleet disengaged and jumped to faster than light speed as quickly as possible. The human fleet regrouped near the station as repair teams assessed damage. The battle had lasted 3 hours and the outcome was decisive. 8 Zelthian warships were destroyed or crippled. 7 had retreated with various levels of damage. The human fleet had sustained damage, but every ship remained operational. Not a single vessel had been lost. The crews celebrated, but Jake kept them focused. This victory would have enormous consequences. The Zelthian Empire had been defeated by a force 1/3 their size. The Council's most powerful military had failed to subdue humanity.